So sorting that out. Welcome everybody. I'm going to click a button here. This is our first in-person convening for the National Strategy for the Next Generations programme. So we're super delighted to have you all here in the room and to have everyone here online who are also participating today. This is a programme that's been running since 2020, started virtually, but really we're about how we can start a coalition to build a whole of society approach to national listening, national visioning exercises around the UK's future role in the world. So we're super duper excited to have you today. I can have a click myself. So firstly, for people in the room, welcome. A big thank you to Hilary as well. We're in King's College London today, and that's all thanks to you. So thank you for making that happen. For people in the room, we're not expecting a fire alarm, I have to say that. The fire exit is that way and down the stairs. If there is a fire alarm, and the toilets are just along the corridor there or upstairs for women. So I'm going to pass over to Amalia to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Finn. Hi everyone, and hi everyone online. My name is Amalia, and you'll hear more about me throughout the day, but I also look forward to hearing more about all of you and how all of our work connects. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everybody online. You're a key part of our day and our community, and we would really like you to feel engaged and participate in all of the activities we have for you today. If I could ask for you to gain the most meaningful experience through engaging today by commenting in the chat, sharing your thoughts, opinions and questions, and we have a lovely support network online, Ruth, who will be feeding in all of your suggestions to our in-person audience too. So I hope you feel that your participation is meaningful throughout today as well.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I'm Finn. I'm the creative lead for the National Strategy for the Next Generations. So I'm our other MC and will be leading you throughout today. Just wanted to say quickly about the purpose of today. We really think this is the chance for us to connect as a coalition, as a network of interested people in this programme. So we encourage everyone in the room to connect with each other. We also, as Amalia said, encourage you to connect and do that online. We want to share a bit about our 2023 plans, as well as bringing together opportunities for people to feed in and develop the foundations for some future work that we can do together. I'm going to very quickly just say the agenda for today is I'm going to hand over to Kat now to do an introduction. We're going to have a panel around the purpose of the National Strategy for the Next Generations programme, which you'll see as NSXNG in the slides. We'll have a discussion where hopefully we'll have a chance to bring everyone in and then have a few more opportunities to share about some of the work. So, Kat.
Fabulous, thank you. And how lovely it is to see so many friendly and familiar faces and new faces around here. And hi to everybody on Zoom as well. Let me perhaps first introduce for you who don't know us, School of International Futures. We are a collective coming out of the UK government of practitioners, 40 of us around the world, who basically think that we can use the future as a way to transform the present and to build a better future for current and future generations. So that's what really drives us. We work with thousands of people of networks for this goal around the world. And the beginning of this story of the journey around National Strategy for Next Generations was in this very building almost 5 years ago in the Grand Strategy Centre, where we were talking about, but what does a grand strategy, a national strategy for the 21st century look like? How can we be prepared for the fact that security is no longer traditional security threats? It's like human security issues. What about cohesion? Or how do we actually lead and transition and deal with the environmental challenges ahead and the emerging technology? How do we come together to imagine the future that we want in order to flourish in the face of all the opportunities ahead of us, as well as all the challenges? So it was this kind of instinct that brought us together, John Bew, Hilary, Swaf, but then many other people in the coalition who perhaps so, just go to the next slide, who basically came together all of these people behind this kind of concept of how do we actually bring people together to have a conversation about the future of the UK's role in the world and what we want it to be. So this was what we piloted, and the kind of things that really brought us all together, this multiplicity of actors from civil society to business to civil service to parliamentarians, was this belief in three key basic propositions. That when you're looking at a world of uncertainty and volatility and thinking ahead, you need to understand your history, you need to apply your history. But also you need to have a structured way of thinking about alternative futures and the possibilities and the alternatives that might be ahead. But we also think that this needs to be a whole of society conversation, that in a world of turbulence, when it's about issues of identity, you can't have these conversations without the community being involved. They are intergenerational dialogues that we need. We need to tap into people's ideas and thoughts, but also agency, because a lot of these transitions, if you start looking 10, 20, 30 years ahead, need political consensus and people coming together. And fundamentally, this kind of deliberation together, whole of society deliberation, fundamentally needs to be connected to forms of representative democracy. And that is why in 2020, we thought that the integrated review, which is the one part in government that does long-term thinking across the different departments, was a great vehicle to start that whole conversation. So that's what we did, and we piloted, and if you look at the next slide that my kind colleagues online will move forward for me, this is what we basically did. We did a whole series of online futures exercises, looking at alternative scenarios, coming together. What is a desired vision that we all want to come together around? What are shocks that we might need to be prepared for? We did surveys to really get an understanding of people's sentiment analysis, cross-generational dialogue. We did a lecture series here in King's, and we did a test of citizens' assembly on this topic. And what we found was that, and you see this quote on the left and the right, is that senior decision makers we captured the zeitgeist. They're also wrestling with these questions, which is how do you actually trade off questions of current and future generations? But also, what are some of the apparatuses and methods by which you can take long-term insights into decision-making today? And those set of conclusions, as you'll see on the next slide, basically was what we decided to take forward, which was that we needed a recommendation around having a national dialogue that is connected but independent from government, that needs to be absolutely connected to political conversations about the future out to 2025 and 2045, and that the national apparatus for having conversations about this needs to be strengthened. Now, in the 2 years since then, we have very much focused on demonstrator projects around the first, really. So you will see on the next slide that we have been working with the National Lottery's support on training a cohort of youth champions who are then having local community conversations, connecting the global to the local about their future. We've been doing a deep dive with bond support around the future of international development and the UK's role as a global citizen. We've also been looking at how you engage with these actors into parliamentary processes like the Joint Committee of National Strategy and Security, or, for example, inquiries on biosecurity, and basically really demonstrated that not only is this feasible, but you get some really quality insight by doing this. And then finally, we have basically started, with Gates' help, this process now over 2023, where we can build and continue to return to this ambition of what does a dialogue look like, how do you build the apparatus, and how do you connect this into political conversation. So this is effectively our invitation to you, that we've got this year-long program and we would love to shape it and build it with you to make it as strong as it could be. So the final slide is, ultimately, we want to kind of share what this journey looks like and highlight some lessons learned, and so we can shape those plans and then hear also what you're working on and how we can connect together. So that's a little bit what we're going to be doing today. But first of all, I'm going to invite a fantastic panel of wonderful speakers who have been with us on this journey. Richard was there when we did the public launch and you wrote about it in your book. Richard Fisher is from BBC Futures and has just written a book called The Long View that is coming out in March. Sir Peter Ricketts was my boss when I was in the Foreign Office, and was of course the National Security Advisor, and someone who is just incredibly very much championed this all the way. So thank you, Peter. And we've got Sophie Howe. This is officially her last day on the job as the first Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, who has been transformational in how she's really got that kind of the public dialogue, the apparatus, and also the political conversations going about the future of Wales. So we couldn't have a better panel to really kick us off with about why is it so important to take this whole of society approach to thinking about the future of the UK and the world than this fantastic panel. So I'm going to invite Peter to start us off, then Sophie, and then Richard. Thank you.
All move to sit here very quickly. Thank you.
We're moving around. Okay, yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Well, thank you very much indeed, Kat, and thanks everyone for being with us. I do feel passionately about this subject. I've been a national security professional for 50 years almost, really, and was the first national security advisor. And it's striking when you think back that when I was a young diplomat, foreign policy and defense and national security were a kind of mysterious art carried on between consenting government departments, diplomats and spies and military, with very little public accountability, really, or public involvement. And it really only intruded on the life of the citizen when something went spectacularly wrong, like a war, when suddenly everyone was pitched into it. But in the course of my career, the whole foreign policy area has become democratized, if you could say it like that. And there are a whole series of reasons why the next generation of leaders, you who will be taking over the levers of power in this country in the decades ahead, need to be involved. And obviously, let me just tick them off. The world is far more interconnected than it ever was in the past, even if we're over the peak of globalization of trade and supply chains. Data, people movement, services are far more fleet-footed now than they ever were, and they're respecters of frontiers. And we've moved to the point where Britain is affected by anything that happens in the world in a whole series of different areas. The environment, energy, public health, we've discovered recently, climate change, cyber. All these areas are areas where we are affected by developments overseas, and where government cannot itself handle the problem alone. The government cannot make us all safe from cyber attacks. Cyber resilience is something for every citizen. The government can't keep us safe from a pandemic, and the government itself is not the main actor in reducing carbon. Businesses, cities, individual citizens, the choices we all make are all relevant to that as well. And so in many ways, national security is now a shared responsibility with the whole of society in a way that it perhaps wasn't before, certainly didn't feel like that before. And then last point in the list, the citizen has more of a voice now than it ever had before, as a result, particularly of social media, but also a greater demand for accountability of those in power. And so there is both the need and the opportunity for younger people to be much more engaged than they were in the past in the way governments think about and form policy on foreign policy and national security. And therefore, I think it's all the more vital that we develop the systems to do that. And I also think it's very important, and I speak as a former government official, and I know there are current government officials in the room, I think it's incredibly hard in government to lift your eyes from crisis management, because governments, politicians survive by getting through day by day, week by week, by confronting today's crisis, which is already hard enough without having also to do the foresight, the preparedness, the contingency planning, the resilience planning for what may lie ahead. And actually, I think governments really need input from think tanks, universities, the media, and citizens groups to do that, to think ahead. And I give credit to the government in the integrated review process last time around, 21, for reaching out and engaging with quite a wide range of opinion formers and people with a view. And I hope the same thing is being done in the rather more rapid IR refresh that's going on now. And it's vital that we all grab those things. I'm coming to the end. I say that because you can imagine one future for the UK, which is towards isolation, towards limiting immigration, towards reducing our aid and development activity in the world, and trying to pull in. There's another future of international connectedness, of working closely with our allies, what we've done in the past so well, not only promoting our own interests, but helping to solve problems of other people, because their problems become our problems very quickly. I very much think the latter is the right course, and the decisions taken now will affect and influence the world that you grew up and inherit. So get stuck in.
Thank you very much, Peter, and lots of nods around the room for those of you at home. We've brought together a brilliant panel, people, Peter with experience from inside government, Sophie, your experience now as an independent commissioner, perhaps looking in and really driving change. Interested in your views on it.
Yes, I mean, just for those who don't know about the Wellbeing Future Generations Act in Wales, the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, passed in 2015 something called the Wellbeing Future Generations Act. It does a number of things. It sets out this overarching principle that all of our key institutions, so that's all our local authorities, our health boards, national organisations like Natural Resources Wales, Public Health Wales, and significantly the Welsh Government and Welsh ministers themselves must demonstrate how they're taking decisions in a way which meets today's needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It then essentially does what, you know, I think we want in a national UK national strategy to do. It sets out a vision for the Wales that we want to leave behind to future generations, and that vision was co-created with citizens of Wales through a national conversation called the Wales We Want, where the government, working with NGOs and others, posed this question: you know, what is the sort of Wales you want to leave behind to your children, your grandchildren, and future generations to come? And we drew from at the same time the UN Sustainable Development Goals were in development. We drew from that. We drew what the people of Wales said. I mean, you know, the question is always posed: how can you possibly know what future generations want? Well, you can't. You know, they're not born, so they don't speak to you, tell you. But creating that kind of collective vision with this, you know, approach where you're asking people to think beyond the here and now and to their sort of great grandchildren was really successful in getting the people of Wales to construct this vision for Wales. And then it sets out 5 ways of working. All our institutions must plan for the long term. They must prevent problems from occurring. They must integrate their thinking, collaborate and involve citizens, and it establishes an independent Future Generations Commissioner, and that is me for about the next 14 hours. So I have almost completed a 7-year term as the first Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. So my job is to both advise and support our institutions on how they reach our long-term wellbeing goals and how they can use future trend scenarios, what tools they can use, and worked very closely on this as well, what tools they can use. But I think the most important, and also to sort of monitor and assess and intervene where I think that they might be not meeting the legislation and might be compromising the interests of future generations. And it's really been transformative in Wales. And I think probably the most transformative thing is the fact that we do have this vision. Because when you're trying, in the absence of a vision, to get people to think long term, to get people to think about the future, the threats and the opportunities and so on, particularly as government and our public services move, you know, from one crisis to another, I think it's sort of human nature almost that, you know, if we're just thinking about all these threats, not really knowing where we're going, but trying to stave off these threats when we don't quite know what their impact will be, people just can't get their heads around that, and they revert back to, I'll just deal with the current crisis. So having that vision for Wales is critically important. It's a positive vision, and if you think about it on a societal level, even with sort of popular culture, you know, if you think of every Netflix drama or every film that's about the future, it's a dystopian vision. About 99% of them are dystopian visions. So if you can create that positive vision, get a whole country, not just a government, but a whole country signed up to, we know where we're going. And yes, we need to anticipate things that might set us off course and might take us away from that vision and act on those. But we know where it is that we're going, and we know, therefore, the steps that we need to take to get towards it. That's incredibly powerful. And I think that's why, you know, having a whole UK strategy is really important.
Sophie, thank you so much. You've been a total inspiration in your role. We look forward to seeing what you're doing afterwards. And in fact, your counterpart, the Future Generations from Gibraltar, is also online. So hello, thank you for joining us, together with people from NATO, OECD, UN, and other countries. And I guess, you know, it's been really interesting how over the past couple of years, questions of intergenerational fairness, because of the amazing solidarity we displayed, but also a growing awareness of the unfairnesses of some of the costs that are coming down the pipeline. This is all becoming increasingly important across the world, different ways of doing that. And also with our common agenda, people are thinking about how do we actually set up institutions like Future Generations Commissioners. No, Lord Burge's got a bill, private members bill in Parliament on this very topic to create one in the UK. But these kind of institutional innovations are really interesting. Richard, you also got the futures bug a few years ago, to the extent that you actually not just write for BBC Futures, but also wrote a book about it. Tell us a little bit about your views on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the long-term time bug's always been I studied geology at university, so I've always been interested in like what does it take to kind of take a longer view. But I guess that the trigger for me to kind of focus more on the question of, you know, how do you take the long view, just the focus of my upcoming book. It began with my daughter not long after she was born in 2013. I sleep deprived, thinking about kind of her future, realized that like she may well live to see the next century. You know, she'll be 2013, you know, it's a pretty good chance she'll be 86, 87 years old, kind of in a rocking chair admiring fireworks. And it was a pleasant daydream, but then I reflected a bit further and thought about how I normally report on the year 2100 in my journalism at the BBC and elsewhere where I used to work at New Scientist. You know, usually 2100 is the kind of date that's cited in reports about sea level rise or robots taking on jobs, or it's not a date that we can look forward to with hope a lot of time. And so I kind of wanted to kind of understand how to change that view, how to kind of look forward to the next century and beyond with a bit more hope and expectation of something better. That led me to the words of Edmund Burke from the 18th century. He wrote about the idea that society is a partnership, a contract between generations. There are people who are dead, there are people living, and those who are yet to be born. We need to think about the duty to posterity, the long arc of time and our role within it. And so I spent a year out at MIT doing a fellowship, took a sabbatical from the BBC, and that was where I did the majority of my research on my book. I was looking on kind of various questions like what are the kind of like psychological biases and habits that kind of nudge us towards a shorter term view. There's well-known ones like the marshmallow bias, where you give a child like a marshmallow and say, would you like to wait for two or just accept one? And this present bias is ubiquitous in all realms of life. It's not just children, it's adults too. But there are many other kind of habits and biases that exist that are a bit less well known. I mean, one of my favorites is the way that we often talk about the future as being far. So this is kind of like an area of psychology research called construal level theory, which kind of explores the idea that when you kind of equate time with distance, it makes it seem further away. So personally, that's kind of like fed into how I talk about the future. I tend not to talk about the far future anymore, because that frames it as being a distant land somewhere over the horizon, when of course like the next generation are going to be living in the city, in our neighborhood, like inheriting the community and the environment that we give to them. So, you know, those psychological benefits I thought were interesting to understand, but I also looked at the external pressures too. So across politics and capitalism, the kind of the quarterly thinking that exists within business, the kind of the crisis after crisis that exists in politics. I think that is getting more recognition. You pointed to Davos recently, like people were talking about the word polycrisis. There are many kind of like sociological scholars that are talking about how the narratives change from being one of progress to one of crisis. When you're kind of moving from one crisis to another, it is very difficult to think long term. So, and that was my goal, to try and kind of understand like what factors, internal, external, lead to kind of like that short term time link of view. But later in the book and the research, I kind of found that there are many different communities that are kind of trying to extend their minds into long-term time, long-minded. What's interesting for me as a writer and a journalist is that often they haven't connected with one another. So there are kind of there's the artistic kind of artists who are making long-term time. There's the scientific view. There's the long-termists. There's people working in government. I think what there isn't, the connections aren't there, and so that's why I think it's interesting, the possibility of connecting them into a network down the line.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, and a big round of applause.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to our three panelists. We've now got about a 5-minute period where I'm going to invite people in the room to also share about how their work or their context connects to this larger question of why we need a sort of broader societal dialogue around the UK's role in the world. So that's just teeing you up, people in the room. I'm going to sort of ask for any contributions. At this moment, we're not going to go to questions. We will have a moment for a Q&A slightly later in the session. We'll also have Amelia, who's going to take some comments from anyone on Zoom who would like to share how they relate to this larger question. So, no pressure, but is there anyone from the room who would like to come in briefly and share how they connect to the larger purpose of this work? Anthony, is there anyone else? I'm just aware you're about to speak in the next panel, so you might get some of that then. Yes, we've got two over here. I'm going to turn the laptop around so you can see. Please speak up. We can have you first, and then speak up.
Hey, my name is Jakob Isaksson, and I work in the Ministry of Defense in the team, the Futures team, doing the global strategic trends, and we really spend every imaginable effort to try to understand how the world is changing and what it may look like. We can't predict, but what it may look like a generation forward. And it's meant for government people to think, start discussions, and make discussions, because just as you say, future analysis doesn't make sense unless you take the questions back and ask yourself what we need to do today to shape the future. But I would say this is openly available for anyone to have those discussions, and that's what we want also. So we try to engage much more widely than just government people all over the world.
Brilliant, thank you. Sahil.
Thanks. Thank everyone. So I wear 6 different hats, so I won't bore you with those. But I think a key part that is missing is education and complexity. Building upon what Ulrich had said about the 21st century and everything from information ecosystems through to things like climate tipping points, changes in international relations, geopolitics, resource wars. I think when we look at a whole of society approach, thinking about the future of the UK and its role in the world, not just about what it is that we can bring from citizens, but how actually look to educate and inform citizens. Because I've been recently doing some polling on the war in Ukraine, and a little bit of knowledge can be very dangerous thing. So I think when we're looking at this whole society approach, I think it's critical to look at not just the formal education sector, but what are the roles more broadly in civil society when it comes to engaging with these complex interconnected global issues and how this can be better understood by those members.
Fantastic. We've got Laurie on the left here.
Well, because I've got
You-
a question, it's sort of like a statement and a question, so one rather than the other, we're gonna wait for questions.
For sure, let's hear them both briefly together.
All right, so
You
my
can
name's-
stand up as well.
So my name's Laurie Smith, I work for Nesta, which is an innovation agency for social good, and we did quite a fun exercise with Prospect magazine at the end of last year called Minister of the Future. So we imagined a fictional Minister of the Future as a conceit, as a way of sort of exploring sort of long-term ideas. And I've checked that out on Nesta's website, from Prospect magazine. But so the question I want to put to the panel was, if you were pitching an idea to the Minister of the Future to make government more long-termist, other than, of course, adding a Future Generations Commissioner to the United Kingdom, let's cross that one up. It's an obvious answer. What one policy measure would you say to this minister that the UK government should do to sort of embed long-termism? So I certainly see there's lots of intent, which is really well meaning, but the system seems to push everyone in completely different direction.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to hold on that question for now, because I'd also love to come, and we've got 1 minute for this Q&A, so we'd love to come and hear some comments from the Zoom chat as well. But I'm encouraging everyone to sort of think about that question and think, what one policy proposal would you put forward as well?
Okay.
Uh,
So
Do you want to sort of come and show him?
remote working here. Okay, so Juliet said on the Zoom chat, I really like what Peter is saying about national security challenges being all of our responsibility, and to think about how we can each use our own agency in that space. Adam Sharp said, congratulations to Sophie, woohoo! For flying the flag globally, future generations. Really inspiring work for so many around the world. Reflecting on your time as well, this is the question, and I think so we'll come back to it later around reflecting on your time as a commissioner, and on what you've learned throughout, if that's okay. Okay, another comment from Indra was talking about youth leaders being usually from the age of 20 to 30 years old, and then being wired differently to imagine different futures around the world. And some of the skills that might be needed for this are emotional resilience, insights, and imagination. And just to summarize the last two, Lisa was talking about our Community Futures programme, working with lots of youth leaders, and so congratulations, Finn, for all this, contributing to that discussion. And lastly, Perry Walker talked about their work doing a climate walk activity with young people who walk across the room, one side representing today and the other side representing the future. And they were all giving a round of applause at home from their end. So thank you for sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your comments in the room. Thank you as well for questions in the chat and in the room. We will collect these and try and bring them in our final Q&A. For now, we're going to race on to hear from some coalition members. So very briefly, Anthony and Hilary, if I could bring you to the front, and we'll hear about some of the work that you did in our initial pilot program in 2020. And then we'll hear from some next generation champions as well on our more recent work. So Anthony, if you'd like to kick us off.
Thank you. So I'm Anthony Zachrzewski. I run an organisation called Democratic Society, and we do a lot of work on citizen participation and new models of governance. We've done things like the conference on the future of Europe. We've officially evaluated for that. And also the Future of Scotland Citizens Assembly was something that we worked on with our friends at Involve. So we've got quite a lot of experience in thinking about how you structure these kinds of conversations about big picture, big questions. And we worked with SWAF and with Kat on a small test assembly to understand how we might address some of these questions through citizen participation. So you can see there that we've got some of our track record going from open policy making at quite high level through to some quite practical questions around the future of the NHS and around NHS services. So in that frame, we try to understand what are the national strategy issues, how do we address these big strategic questions. And I suppose the things I would summarize from what we learned are first, it's really important to bring together a group of people who are sharing some of the same levels of understanding, or if you don't have those, to bring people up to that level quite quickly. So we discovered in our test assembly that there were some people who were really comfortable with the language that is used around geopolitics and strategy, and some really weren't. So we should have invested more time, or a future program should invest time in bringing people up to the same level of language, the same level of understanding, not to make them like mini civil servants, always weighing up the choices, but to make sure they're all talking on the same level. The second big thing we learned is that there is a huge appetite to talk about these questions, but they very rapidly ramify into lots and lots of small issues. So modeling on the Conference on the Future of Europe, taking a kind of thematic approach where different people are grouped to discuss different issues, they come back together to look at the trade-offs and the other issues towards the end, would be a really useful way of approaching this. If you start by a big question like strategy, you tend to get big, relatively meaningless, kind of top-heavy answers, rather than something that really is a strategy approach that you can work with. So I think what we learned was it's absolutely possible to have these conversations. We work with a very enthusiastic group of volunteers, and obviously in a formal process, you do random selection or something a bit broader. But we did have, I think, a very useful test of some of these approaches. And again, there's a lot to learn from what's going on elsewhere in the UK and elsewhere in Europe for these issues.
Thank you. Hello.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome to King's. Welcome to our house. My name is Hilary. I'm part of the Centre for Grant Strategy here at King's and a lecturer in the Department of War Studies, where you all are now. It's really great to be working with SWAC. I interned for CAT 10 years ago, so been thinking it's nice to see the partnership continue. So as part of this, the initial idea for this program, our Centre for Grant Strategy ran a series of 4 seminars, which asked a different question related to generating ideas around the project. So the first one was about applied history. So really, how do we take the lessons of the past to help inform our approach to the future? So really the idea of the learning from that is how we need to look back to also be able to look forward. And the second one was about the idea of grand strategy, which is big picture, long-term thinking. And we're thinking about how do you actually do this in practice when facing all of the sorts of crisis challenges that Lord Ricketts just spoke about. You know, how do we give policymakers time to think about the future? How do we make sure there is space to be thinking long-term and not the day-to-day? The third one was about community and identity. So really, if we say things like a global Britain, or if we say things like you know, a Britain of the future, what is this? What does it look like? What are the stories we tell ourselves about who we are? And how do we bring people on board in a way that has empathy and brings people together? And the last one was about process of strategy. So really, how do we do this in practice? And we learned a lot from sort of the Welsh process of engagement and legislation, actually institutionalizing this. So it's not just an idea, but how do we make it work in practice? And so some key takeaways, as I mentioned, are we need to look back to be able to look forward. We need to give our policymakers time to actually engage in this process. We need to support them with structures, but we also need to think about that important element of identity and cohesion. So I was going to respond to the question before about whole of society. And the question there is really, how do we make sure it is whole of society? It's not just practitioners, it's not just academics, it's not just the educated, it's not just those who look the same in the room, but actually how do we bring more of society on board? How do we reach out to local communities, to people who might not have time or space to think about the future in their day-to-day life, but how do we actually make sure this is something that reflects all of us? And I don't have the answer to that yet, but I think it's something we should keep in mind throughout this process. So great to have you here so often, great to be involved.
Thank you both so much. I realize these are incredibly short interjections, which are hopefully getting everyone's neurons firing, coming up with ideas that will feed into the rest of the day and our discussions today. I really encourage people in Zoom as well to continue to post thoughts, comments, contributions in. We will be harvesting these in the break and feeding them into our in-person conversations later on. So you really are feeding into the day and feeding into the thought processes that we're going through today. But thank you both so much. And if I can invite Niasha, Nirishan, and Malia to come up for the next one. No? Okay. Marcella, would you like to take Niasha's place? Sorry, she has to rush off to a meeting, and our timing unfortunately didn't work for her contribution.
Thank you so much, Finn. And hi everyone again. So as mentioned before, my name is Amalia and I am a Next Generation Champion and also Youth Engagement Officer for UK Youth, supporting on the I Will movement of 300 ambassadors to shape change in their local communities and have their voices heard at a local and national level. I'd now like to share the journeys and stories of my fellow next generation champions and the valuable experiences that we've had together. Nurashan, could I start with you? So Nurashan, I'm pleased to introduce who engaged in our Community Futures program funded by the National Lottery. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here. I've been asked to just share back what I've learned in the program. It was a 12-week course that started in September. We started with learning about what futures thinking is all about. We learned through the Sustainable Development Goals set by the United Nations, what that means for our generation and generations to come. We looked at some visioning practices where we could apply this to local projects and community groups, where how do we look at future visioning exercises and how do we take that to the local level. And as part of that is we do a project in our local area. So I'm from Cardiff, like Sophie. I live in a ward called Grangestown, the most multicultural ward all across Wales, and people there have all sorts of different challenges. The area is prone to flooding in the next 50 years. If nothing is done, the entire ward will be underwater. So, you know, all these challenges that the next generation has to be thinking about and dealing with. So we invited Shout Out UK to come along and do a workshop with us. And they asked young people to imagine the future government that could be in place to tackle these issues. And we had two distinct groups of young people. One group came up with a government that is pretty similar to now, but just changing the people around. I won't go too much into why that is the case. But then another group completely changed and said they want to operate in a presidential model without a cabinet, but local people being the ones that are decision makers, and the president being only appointed directly by citizens. That's what one group of young people came up with. That's their government for the future, which was really interesting to me. And as part of that, we're looking at this grand strategy. I'm also a trustee for a small charity, international development charity called Welsh Centre for International Affairs. Through this work, we're looking at putting together a 50-year strategy. So this is the start of the process. We're looking at what the charity's role will be 50 to 100 years from now, how they will engage with stakeholders, and would it even exist? What would their main purpose be? So really getting into the nuts and bolts of engaging with stakeholders, engaging with the local people, how our charity can live up to the next 50 years. So yeah, that's the sort of things we've been doing, and the program has really helped with.
Thank you so much, Nurashan. I think I really resonate with your experience with that program around the global goals, and personally understanding the intersectionality behind them, and also creating enabling environments for young people to be heard throughout the development of some of these ideas. And I think, especially with the opportunity to bring our lived experiences to the group, really valuable for me. In terms of me being a South Asian Muslim girl, having grown up in a strict patriarchal community, and how some of those things kind of, you know, create and perpetuate inequalities throughout different lived experiences for young people across the UK. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us as well. Marcella, handing over to you, what was the experience like for you?
Thanks, Amelia, and I apologize in advance. I was not expecting to speak on this today, so I hope that I can do it justice. Finn, if I forget anything, please do jump in. So we were engaged in a 5-month process that was building on the next strategy for the next generation, and we were doing a deep dive into the international development sector, and in particular envisioning what the role of the UK might be in that international development in the future. And we brought together, well, the team brought together a group of champions from very diverse backgrounds and across a very varied range of age groups, from the age 16 to 30, who were part of this envisioning process. And we're using trends and drivers to set the context of what that future might look like for the sector. And we developed some artifacts based on this work. And some of these artifacts, I think we can see on the next slide, we're bringing to the fore what kind of shifts can we make in this sector. What if our future vision would be that wealth and wealth did not depend on the economic system or on GDP, but maybe on access to green energy. And what if we decoupled some of these traditional ways that we look at progress in the future and with regards to development? And we integrated futures approaches to help us do that. And yeah, we were essentially presenting some of these things to a group of stakeholders and experts from the international development field in order to stretch that thinking. So yeah, thank you. I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Marcella. Thank you so much for the background behind the programme. And I think one of the things that I really take away was the youth-led design of the entire initiative, empowering us as young people to identify solutions to problems that we ourselves identify, and then equipping us to bring those skills back to all of the diverse communities, contexts and work that we engage in. So thank you very much to Finn and the team. Finn, I think I'm welcoming you back now.
Yes, a round of applause to both. Fantastic. It's so inspiring to hear next generation champions talk about their different pieces of work. I also just want to share that this is a sort of brilliant and lively sample of some of the young people we're working with. We also have, as part of the National Lottery Community Dialogues, people like Sally, who's working in Newcastle to do a dialogue with an Eritrean community. We have Andrew, who's doing an online dialogue in Northern Ireland with people with disabilities. We have Tanya, who's doing a dialogue. We have like a really exciting group of different people. Mohammed is working with his boxing club in South London to hold a really interesting conversation there. So we're seeding these countries all around seeding these conversations all around the country, as Anthony said, to sort of start from a community level with some of these conversations, while also, like Marcella was talking to, holding deep dives at a more sort of strategic level into some key topics around the programme. My background was as an NGFP fellow and also as a youth ambassador. So I just wanted to say that it's really exciting to have sort of come up to now be designing and leading this program from that position. I just want to share now for 5 minutes about some of the work we're doing throughout 2023, the idea being that this will seed some thoughts around how we can collaborate on these different programs, but also hopefully get everyone thinking what's not represented here, what's missing, where are the opportunities for further work, and we can develop that throughout the rest of the day. So there are 3 pillars really that our current program is built on. So one of these is intergenerational dialogues in communities, which I think you've already heard about, and hopefully bringing together different generations to host these nuanced and interesting conversations, but also then feeding those insights back to a higher level about what should that mean for the UK's role in the world and national strategy. Then this second pillar is training people to use foresights for systems change. So that really brings me back to that comment in the chat from Indra that was talking about how we need a sort of nuanced approach to sort of civic education that brings in skills like activism, that brings in skills like foresight to provide a skills-based education. We're doing that with some of our champions while concurrently supporting them to engage and run these intergenerational dialogues. And then this final pillar is about connecting insights into government and parliament. Now we're hosting briefings with different departments. We're talking to various civil servants about this, but we're also trying to develop a parliamentary community, in particular through the APPG for Future Generations, but also looking to engage with other APPGs. And we're trying to connect individual next generation champions with their local MPs to figure out how we can use that route as a way to connect these local civic dialogues to a larger national conversation. So just to say, I'm not going to go into detail here. Within each of these strands throughout 2023, we have a series of activities. They're up here to try and show that there are places where you can connect in. So we're running local dialogues. We're hoping to do dissemination with media and MPs. Foresight Leadership will be doing community weaving around all of this, and then also having a series of awards to support champions to then go out, scale their dialogues, and make even more impacts with the projects that they're running on the ground. In addition to that, weaving this network of parliamentarians and using a tool that SWAF has developed with the APPG for Future Generations called Future Check, which is a really short
youth-led intergenerational fairness assessment that can be applied to any bill going through and give a one-pager with comments and amendments for MPs to bring up in the House, in addition to roundtables. The next slide is just saying some different ways that you can get involved in all of this activity. That's from acting as a mentor, connecting champions to different groups in local communities. It's joining advisory groups for different parts of the program, being that a media advisory group or perhaps an advisory group around sort of specifically influencing and how we might connect into government. Supporting with recruitment outreach, judging awards, etc., etc. There are lots more on there. But the key thing we want to say on the next slide is also that there are ways for you as a community to plug into some of these plans over 2023. But this is by no means the limit of the ambition that we have. And really what today is about finding ways to build other pieces of that jigsaw puzzle as well, because those three pillars are not in themselves a whole of society dialogue around national strategy, and they don't take us as far as we want to go with this program. So other puzzle pieces include how can we bring in sortition citizens assembly methods like Anthony was saying. If we could just keep the previous slide up for a second. Previous slide. How can we scale this kind of engagement through the civil service? How can we bring in mass consultation, systemically engage with political parties, or do deep dives on political issues like we did on international cooperation, but on other key topics, for example, nuclear, space, and circular economy. And then also, how can we scale this as a popular public dialogue in a more broader sense as well? These are just some ideas that we're trying to seed as a route for our discussions later today. So now I want to open up to a conversation. I think, were you going to introduce this one?
You go ahead.
Shall I?
Yeah,
All
you're on a roll.
I feel like I've
Love
been
it.
talking enough already, but there we are. We want to open the floor really to think about how we can collectively move forward against this agenda. So this is an opportunity where, again, we'll try and come back to some of the questions that were posed earlier, but hopefully also give a chance for people to suggest concrete collaborations, ways we might build this on these foundations and move forward together. So I think this is again teeing up people in the room for a chance to come on in this if you're interested, and we'll also bring people in from Zoom and online as well.
So I think we'll open the discussion here, and so everyone can have a collective kind of sharing, and I'll move over to the Zoom chat and feedback like I did earlier.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to open the floor once more to people in the room around this question of how can we collectively move forward on this agenda? What do you sort of think? What do you think about that question, and how does it relate again to your context and how you're working in this space? Yes, over here.
Hey everyone, I'm Jo Rich. I'm head of Youth Voice at the National Lorry Community Fund, and it's great to see this work come to fruition, because I think me and Kat had a conversation back in COVID 3 years ago, so it's really awesome to see the connection. I suppose I just wanted to make the point that the key to all this, which has been said over and over again, is bridging the gap between all these incredible thinkers and the young people in communities, which is beginning to happen. So how can we do that more? Obviously, the National Lottery Community Fund, by the nature of what we do, which is 600 million into communities every year, it would be great to kind of monopolise on those connections. We've also got great networks across the UK. So it'd be really great to kind of see how we can get the grassroots voices into all this work as well. So thank you, and great to see how far it's moved on.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, over there in the room.
Understand.
Yes, please, it might be easier for our online audience.
So I'm Pooja. I work with an organization called Apolitical. We are a learning and social network for governments around the world. Our platform is currently being used by about 200,000 public servants from about 6 countries. We also have a sister organization called Apolitical Foundation, which trains elected officials, younger ones that don't get represented usually in parliaments around the world. So the three areas where I think we'd love to collaborate. One is how do you upskill the next generation sitting within governments and next generation with aspirations to stand for elected offices, because these are the people who will actually influence the policies and programs. So how do we bring them into the conversation? The second one is recognition of existing policies that actually bring next generation into the conversation, because there's needs to be practical case studies and stories and examples of how you can actually do that. So we'd love to explore how we can collaborate and help on that.
Yes.
Hi everyone, so I'm Claire Lee and I'm the Director of Global Policy and Advocacy at Save the Children. This whole agenda fits really well with the direction of travel with Save the Children. We're focusing, after 100 years of operation, we're finally putting kids at the forefront of kind of leading our work, and we're learning how to involve children in every aspect of our influencing work. It's we're kind of at an early stage of that journey, but this is really interesting for me, and I think there are opportunities to share best practice about how to actually engage kids fruitfully. We're also targeting younger children, so I think there's an interesting question about how you bring younger voices into this conversation other than just youth. We're also starting to take the longer view, so looking at huge structural issues like climate change, economic orthodoxies that underpin the reasons that child rights aren't fulfilled around the world. So there's something about taking the longer view together. I wonder whether there's opportunities to connect children in the UK to children overseas, for example, that we could work on. And also we're trying to build children, bring children in the UK into our UK influencing activities as well. For example, we're building children's assemblies made up of refugees living in the UK to decide how we influence the government on issues of conflict overseas, for example. So I think there's loads of ways that we can collaborate together, but also I think there's a learning journey that needs to happen together, and I think wonder whether that's part of the conversation we've had this year is kind of sharing best practice as well.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Any more in the room? There's a hand up in the chat. There's a hand up in the chat. Then shall I pass to Amalia, or should we unmute on the? Let's unmute here, and we can give you opportunity to speak. Hello,
Finn.
Hello, Adam. Is that you with the hand up?
Yeah, it was.
To speak now.
Great job on the emceeing. Hello, everyone. Adam Sharp here, Director of Learning at Meta Future School, and also a consultant with UNICEF. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. I think there's a fundamental, that question from our friend at Nesta. I'm sorry, I didn't pick up your name. What's one thing we could do to encourage long-term thinking in government? I think the elephant in the room for me is it possible to do this without sort of quite radical change at a systemic and a cultural level? It's hard enough to move the needle on climate crisis, which so clearly affects future generations. I mean, I've been working in youth development and youth engagement for over a decade, so no one believes more in the importance of raising the youth voice, advocating for their inclusion. But I do sometimes worry, even about my own work in this space, that just giving voice and creating a space for young people doesn't really challenge nor alter the power balance, the roots of power, nor the inequities and misinformation at the heart of the system that makes it so challenging. So I suppose one of the reasons why I wanted to ask a question to Sophie Howe, who's been in government, who's been doing it, is it possible to do this with the existing system carrying on as it is, short-term electoral cycles, or do we need a much more radical change? And is that what young people should be advocating for? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Adam. I will now, I think we can bring in Sophie and also tee up the panelists if they wanted to respond to Laurie's earlier question about one thing that you would change. Sophie, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly made progress in Wales, but can I say that every civil servant and every politician and every government, local government official are taking decisions absolutely with the long term in mind? No, I definitely cannot say that, because it's a massive cultural change program that we've got here. And I mean, you were talking, I suppose, about the big ticket items there, like electoral system reform, but some of the stuff that we've been trying to do are things like every aspect of everything that exists already in the system works against long-term thinking, short-term performance measures, short-term budgets, a lack of kind of join up and holistic thinking, so protectionism and siloed working and all of those sorts of things. So I think that it is, you know, still possible to make those incremental changes when you have something like a Future Generations Act, and you have someone external to the system challenging, and you have that kind of framework or toolkit, if you like, within which the system is supposed to work. However, you know, if you want that radical change that we're talking about, clearly, you know, would escalate things even further. But I don't think you can underestimate how brave a government has got to be to bind itself to legislation like the Future Generations Act. And if I'm brutally honest, I think it was like a moment in time, and the right person, you know, one particular minister who was pushing it, right place, right time. Government didn't really know what they were getting themselves into. In fact, I'll take credit from one government minister, and then the Irish foreign minister came over and said, "We want one of these," pointing to me. The government minister said, "Be careful what you wish for." So I reckon that means I was doing an okay job if I said that. But, you know, I think that sometimes it is just that, you know, being opportunistic, and, you know, there's every likelihood that there will be a Labour government at some point in the not too distant future. Ed Miliband writes about the Future Generations Act in Wales in his book. You know, I've been speaking to some of the shadow cabinet teams. There's this, you know, Labour for the long term, and I think that there's there could be an opportunistic moment there of some real targeted influencing, and you might just see a Future Generations Act or equivalent for the UK pop up in a Labour manifesto, and that would just, you know, really escalate things.
If I can pass over to our panelists for quick points, if you would like.
One of the things I looked at in my book was some of the actual existing kind of policy reforms that are there in the literature, and you don't have to invent them; they are there in political science. So there's a researcher, Simon Caney, who's at the University of Warwick, for example, who's come up with a whole list of things that you could do. One of my favorite ones, though, is a bit mischievous in that it was proposed by a couple of philosophers, and they suggested that the generosity of a politician's pension could be decided by the political generation that follows. So that's never going to happen.
Very good.
Well, I think other things that I would be interested to see would be, like, for example, a future day, which is the equivalent of an Earth Day, that where you know, Earth Day is about kind of expanding our circle of concern geographically to see the planet that we're on. I would love to see kind of that for time, you know, and to allow communities and young people to kind of engage in schools with the idea that we live on this long arc of time. And then that in turn would hopefully allow and pave the way for legislation change. If communities and people out in the world are talking about it and asking for it, then that can help. You know, it's very easy to just say politicians need to change, but we live in a society where, you know, I spend a lot of time kind of trapped in the short-term cycles of Twitter and social media. You know, journalism is just as responsible for kind of focusing politicians on the short term as politicians themselves are. So, you know, I think those kinds of like community-based initiatives where it's hard to think long term when you're on your own, but if you're in a community, I think it's much easier.
Yes, but the problem with democracy is that it's fundamentally short term. Because people have to get elected. You can't do anything until you got elected. And so all the incentives on politicians are short term. And you could sort of dream that a more authoritarian state would be able to make longer term plans. But the good thing about democracy is it's responsive to the system. In the end, people do have to get elected. And so what we're hearing about influencing a potential future government is absolutely right. And I think it has been a truth of our democracy that older people have tended to vote more and to be more committed to getting out there and voting the younger people. But these Democrats who are so focused on the short term and on getting elected, therefore need to understand that for their younger voters who are becoming an increasingly large part of the electorate, things are important that may not be as important to the older generation. So climate is the classic example. And I think to answer the question, a future minister, but I think we've got to get into the position where ministers are feeling the pressure from public opinion to take decisions about the long term and spend money on the future, not on now. And that's what it really comes down to. The problem with climate is you can spend the money on today, hope you'll get re-elected, and not necessarily spend it on the things that will make a difference in the future. So they've got to feel public pressure from all the initiatives that are going on here. But in the end, democracy is the best method. It is short term, but it is responsive to citizens if they make an effective case.
Fantastic. I think we need to move on to our closing words, unfortunately, but please do share in the break with the rest of the people in the room. I'm going to share one call to action now, very briefly, which hopefully will come up on the slides, which is that this is a long-time initiative and it's a collective initiative, and we really would love everyone in the room and everyone who's joining on Zoom to be a part of that initiative in some way. And we know as a network, there are people who will be more engaged and there'll be people on the periphery who want to be less engaged for now. But we'd love you, if you'd like to sign up to participate in some way in this collective endeavor. So on this outer ring, we've got, would you like to just stay informed about the network, hear what's happening, hear about future meetings? A level in, we think there's a fantastic opportunity for people to join in some of the steering, the advisory and the delivery through informal advisory groups or being part of smaller network groups that dive deeper into specific themes. And then also, you know, there is scope to build together, to collaborate, to build on these foundations, to really delivering ambitious pieces of future work. So we hope that some of you online and in the room will also find that an enticing and exciting prospect. So I think that is all that we need to do is now pass over to Kat, who will say a few closing words. Kat, would you like to come here so the Zoom audience can see?
I will
Squeeze through, go on.
squeeze by and just say, how amazing is it to just, and how inspiring it is to have these stories just told and just like bring to life what we're trying to do. So a huge thank you for coming along, and to those on Zoom for sharing your experiences as well. I think that there's, just to Peter's point, this issue around you know, democracy fundamentally not representing at the moment a fundamental stakeholder, which is the interests of unborn or unvoting generations, has moved from being a problem to an existential threat for the planet. And this is what we're wrestling with at the moment. It's in our field, the emergence, and this is the opportunity that faces us, of we can create and start designing what anticipatory democracy really looks like. What are the new institutions, processes that is required? And so, as always, and this is a bipartisan agenda, which is really interesting, both on the left and the right, we're hearing interest, and that's just fantastic to kind of see that interest, take the advantage that at the moment with our common agenda and the UN Global Summit of the Future in September 2024, there is a global conversation about how do you incorporate this into public administration and bottom-up conversations. Now, it's both about stretching ourselves and looking at the future and imagining that transformed and different future, like you did in Cardiff. What does it really look like that's really different? But also at the same time, holding an understanding that we need to take steps from where we are now. And holding those two at the same time, I think, is exactly what we're trying to do in this program. So I'll just say at this point, a huge thank you to everybody that's been involved today. A huge thank you for the National Lottery and Gates for funding the participation in the exercises for the past couple of years, for all the coalition partners that have been contributing their time, for Hilary for hosting us, all the panelists for having done an amazing job, everybody at home and in the room for joining us, and in particular to the two MCs who have led us through such a rich and very complex session today incredibly well. Let's do this together. I think the next 2 or 3 years is really important, and we can just roll our sleeves up and get exciting things done. So thank you very much. And I think at this point, we just say goodbye to everybody at home. Thank you for joining us, and we will continue the conversation later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.